The best specialists in North America had already tried. The developmental neurologists at Vancouver General, the trauma team flown in from Montreal Children's Hospital, a pair of consultants from the States who billed in American dollars and flew home empty-handed. They all said the same thing. Rory Driscoll would never speak again. His father, Bruno Driscoll, the most feared man in Vancouver's waterfront, had enough resources to relocate a small country, but he couldn't buy back his son's voice. That was the reality he had learned to live with, cold and airless as the glass walls of his West Vancouver estate. Then Zola arrived. She was not simply there to polish floors and fold linen. She was carrying a secret that could either save that boy or get her buried under one of Bruno Driscoll's construction sites. The iron gates of the Driscoll estate didn't swing open so much as part, smooth and slow like a vault being unsealed. Zola Whitfield sat in the back of the black SUV with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Not from the November cold that rolled off the North Shore and threw wool like it was tissue paper, but from the effort of appearing calm. The driver, a broad man named Morrow who had met her at the Horseshoe Bay terminal without a single word, hadn't looked at her once during the drive. He didn't need to. She had noticed the shape under his jacket before they'd even left the parking lot. Her paperwork said she was Zola Wells, a woman with decent references from 2 previous households in Burnaby, a clean criminal record, no post-secondary education worth mentioning. That last part was the lie that burned worst. If anyone here ran her real name, if anyone recognized Dr. Zola Whitfield, former head of pediatric occupational therapy at Hargrove Center for Child Development, she wouldn't be getting a job. She'd be getting a one-way trip to Burrard Inlet. 8 months ago, she had been the youngest department head in the clinic's history, with a decade of published research on trauma-induced selective mutism in children under 12. Then the licensing board called. Then the police. Then the reporters. The clinic's director, a man named Clive Renard, had embezzled close to $200,000 in falsified therapy billing, and had done it entirely under Zola's certification number. When the audit arrived, Renard handed investigators a trail that led directly to her desk. The licensing board stripped her credentials in 6 weeks. She lost her apartment, her savings, and every professional contact she had spent 10 years building. No one had hired Dr. Zola Whitfield since. But Zola Wells, a housekeeper with quiet hands and no particular past, had made it through the gates of the most dangerous household in British Columbia. The mansion sat high above the inlet, all glass and dark concrete, the kind of architecture designed not to impress but to warn. Security cameras tracked the SUV's approach like slow, deliberate eyes. Bruno Driscoll was waiting in the study. He was standing at the window when Morrow brought her in, which told her something immediately. He hadn't sat down because sitting required trust, and Bruno Driscoll didn't offer that to anything that came through his front door. He turned when she entered, taller than she'd expected, dressed in charcoal wool that probably cost more than her mother's car. His face was lean and sharp-featured, carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who had not slept soundly in years. His eyes assessed her the way a surgeon assesses a wound, looking for something that shouldn't be there. Miss Wells. A confirmation. Mr. Driscoll. He moved to the front of the desk, crossing his arms. I want to be direct with you. My previous housekeeping staff lasted between 2 weeks and 4 months. The ones who left on their own terms were the fortunate ones. He paused to let that settle. My son is 9 years old. He has not spoken since the accident that killed his mother 18 months ago. The specialists managing his care have a protocol. You will not interfere with that protocol. You will not attempt to draw him out, engage him beyond what the household requires, or bring him objects intended to provoke interaction. Do you understand? I understand, Mr. Driscoll. Good. Mrs. Hennessy will show you to your quarters. For 3 days, Zola was a ghost. She learned the house the way she had learned clinic layouts years ago. By moving through it quietly and paying attention to what other people overlooked, she noted that Morrow rotated the exterior patrol at 6 in the morning and again at 6 in the evening. She noted that Bruno left at 8:30 in a black Range Rover and returned at unpredictable hours, sometimes smelling of salt air, sometimes of something sharper, and she noted Rory. The boy lived mostly in the conservatory on the 2nd floor, a glass-walled room overlooking the inlet and the Lions Gate Bridge beyond. He was thin in the way children get thin when eating becomes something that requires too much effort. He sat in a padded chair most of the day with a weighted blanket across his lap, watching the water. He didn't draw, didn't read, didn't move much. The only sign of recent use in the entire room was a sketchpad on the side table, and every page Zola could see from the doorway was filled with the same image, a bird, wings folded, sitting very still on a wire. Dr. Hedda Venn ran Rory's therapeutic program. She arrived each morning at 9 and spent less time with the boy than she spent on her phone in the hallway outside his door. She was a woman of precise grooming and imprecise attention, and on the occasions she did interact with Rory, her voice had the flat, practiced calm of someone who had stopped actually seeing the child in front of her a long time ago. On Zola's 4th morning, she was dusting the conservatory shelves while Dr. Venn conducted their scheduled session. Rory was staring at the window. Dr. Venn was reading something on her tablet, one knee crossed over the other, not looking up. A grey heron dropped from the sky and landed on the railing just outside the glass. Rory went very still. His gaze sharpened, actually sharpened, the glazed passivity of the past days, replaced by something focused and alive, and Zola, watching from across the room because she couldn't help it, because this was the first time she had seen his face do anything at all, saw his lips part. Not a word, not even a sound, but the shape of one, like his mouth had remembered the concept of speaking and was testing whether it still fit. Then, barely, so barely it might have been a trick of the light, his throat moved. A swallow that was also almost a hum, a vibration suppressed at the last second. Zola set down her cloth. She had spent 7 years studying the difference between a child who could not speak and a child who would not. The first was neurological, damage to the structures, the pathways, the mechanics. The second was something else entirely, something the body built around a wound to keep from bleeding out. Rory Driscoll had just told her, without a single word, which category he belonged to. "All right, Rory," Dr. Venn said, finally looking up. "Time for your afternoon medication." She shook a pill from a small orange bottle, an anxiolytic, higher than anything Zola would have considered appropriate for a child his age and weight. Within 30 minutes, the sharpness in Rory's eyes had dissolved to gauze. The heron was gone, so was whatever Rory had been about to do. Zola walked out of the conservatory before she said something she couldn't take back. She stood in the hallway, with her hands pressed flat against the cold wall. They weren't treating him, they were keeping him quiet, and the difference between those two things was the difference between a child who might find his way back, and one who never would. That night at 2 in the morning, Zola opened her door and walked down the hallway in her socks. She had mapped every board that creaked. She moved around them the way you move around sleeping things you don't want to wake. Rory's door was cracked slightly. A small lamp burned inside, casting everything amber. He was awake. He often was, she suspected. The medication wore off by midnight and the anxiety came back like a tide, and there was no one sitting with him because Dr. Venn went home at 5, and the night nurse Bruno had hired had a habit of sleeping in the armchair by the kitchen with her earbuds in. Rory looked at Zola without moving. His eyes were careful. He was a child who had learned that people appearing in his doorway usually wanted something from him. Zola sat down on the floor just inside the threshold. She didn't approach the bed. She didn't speak immediately. After a moment she said, very quietly, "I saw the heron today, when you were watching it." Rory didn't look away. "I used to work with kids," she said, not explaining, not selling, just talking the way you talk to someone sitting on a ledge. Something to fill the air that isn't pressure, not cleaning houses. I was a therapist, actually, before things went sideways. She looked at the sketch pad on his nightstand. Does the bird have a name? Nothing, but the quality of the nothing had shifted. She said, "I'm going to put my hand on the floor between us, just resting there, and if you don't want me to come any closer, that's fine. I'll stay right here." She placed her palm flat on the hardwood. Rory looked at it for a long time, then he picked up the sketch pad and held it toward her, the bird on the page. Same folded wings, same wire. She looked at it carefully. "He's waiting for something," she said. "Is that right?" Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rory nodded. Zola felt the precise sensation she had first felt as a second-year student. The day she understood that the children she worked with weren't broken. They were waiting. Waiting for someone to figure out which door was still open. "We're going to work on that," she said softly. "But it has to stay between us. Your dad. He's scared of hoping for something and being wrong again. You understand that, don't you?" Rory held her gaze. He did understand. She could see it clearly. This boy was sharp, far sharper than the sedatives, and the silence had allowed anyone to notice. "We'll be careful," she said. "I promise." For the next 2 weeks, Zola lived 2 lives. Efficient, quiet, invisible. She endured Dr. Venn's dismissiveness and Morrow's watchful silences. By night, she was herself again. She had no equipment. She improvised. She used the low vibration of a phone playing ambient tones to help Rory reconnect with the sensation of sound in his own chest. She used drawing and slow, deliberate movement, never forced, never rushed. She developed a private shorthand with him. 2 taps on the sketchpad meant yes, One tap meant no. A circle drawn around the bird meant I'm scared. A wing extended on the bird meant I'm trying. The progress was slow, but it was real. On the 8th night, Rory made a sound. Not a word, a hum, barely audible, half-swallowed, immediately retreated from, but it had happened. On the 12th night, he said a syllable, followed by a panic so acute he went rigid and grabbed her wrist. "It's okay," Zola whispered. "That belonged to you." He didn't let go for several minutes. She didn't move until he did. Then one morning, Bruno didn't leave at 8:30. Zola was in the kitchen when she heard his voice, low and controlled, barely, coming from the study. She brought coffee to the doorway without being asked. He was at his desk with his tie loosened and his eyes carrying the particular flatness of someone who had been awake most of the night. He looked at her, really looked. "Rory ate breakfast," he said. She kept her expression neutral. "I'm glad to hear that." He also asked Mrs. Hennessy for his sketchpad. With a written note, Bruno set down his pen. He hasn't written anything for other people in 4 months. Zola said nothing. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Bruno said. "I'm observing something." A pause. "Is there something you want to tell me?" "I think children sometimes find their own rhythms," she said carefully, "when the pressure eases a little." He held her gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he picked up his phone again. "I have a meeting here this evening. After 7, I need you in your quarters. If I find you wandering the hallways, I'll assume you're someone I should be concerned about." "Of course, Mr. Driscoll." She waited until 11:30. She was 3 steps from Rory's door when she heard the floor creak behind her. Bruno was standing at the end of the hallway. He wasn't holding anything, but his right hand was resting at his hip in a way that communicated everything. "Go back to your room, Miss Wells." "Mr. Driscoll." "That's not a request." "Rory is awake. He's almost always awake at this hour because the medication wears off and there's no one." I said go back. From behind the door came a sound, small, almost nothing, one syllable shaped like a word, soft as something fragile being handled for the first time. Bruno's hand dropped from his hip. He moved to the door and pushed it open. Rory was sitting up in bed, sketchpad open in his lap. On the page, the bird's wing was extended, fully spread, both sides. Bruno stood in the doorway staring at his son. Zola couldn't see his face, but she could see the back of his neck and the way his shoulders pulled inward and then deliberately straightened, as though he was trying to contain something too large for his body. "He made a sound the night before as well," Zola said quietly behind him, "and the night before that. It's not random." Bruno turned. "Who are you?" It wasn't an accusation. It was something rawer. "We should talk downstairs," she said. "Let him sleep." In the study, with the city glittering below through the floor-to-ceiling glass and the inlet dark beyond it, Zola told him the truth. Her real name, what she had spent 10 years researching, and what she had built at Hargrove, and what had been taken from her in 6 weeks. She told him about Rory's specific presentation. Trauma-induced selective mutism layered with complicated grief, compounded by a pharmacological regime that was treating the symptom rather than the wound underneath it. She told him that Dr. Venn's clinical notes described the condition as permanent and progressive, which was either an honest mistake or something considerably worse. Bruno listened without interrupting. He was very still in the way that powerful people are still. Not from patience, but from the kind of control that becomes automatic. "And Renard," he said when she finished. He already had the name. She looked at him carefully. "I've known who you were since your 3rd day here," he said. "Morrow runs background checks. Deep ones. He found the licensing board decision within 48 hours. He leaned back slightly. I let you stay because I wanted to see what you were actually going to do. The air in the room rearranged itself. You knew. I knew you weren't cleaning houses for the love of it." She thought of 2 weeks of sessions, of how carefully she had moved around the cameras, of how exposed she had been every single night. "You were watching." "I was waiting," he said, "for what you'd do with what you found." A pause, and Rory ate breakfast this morning, first time in 6 weeks. He picked up his glass. "Dr. Venn's contract ends Friday. That's already handled." He looked at her steadily. She wasn't motivated by malice. She was motivated by convenience. The result is the same. The medication will be reduced to the minimum necessary, effective tomorrow, under your supervision. He met her eyes. "You're not the housekeeper anymore. You're Rory's therapist. Whatever you need." Zola felt something in her chest. Some architecture she had built around herself in the past 8 months begin to come loose at its foundations. "And Clive Renard." Bruno set down his glass. I have access to certain digital resources that your licensing board does not. Renard's billing records, the original ones, before he overwrote them, exist on a backup server that his IT staff believed was wiped. He said it the way someone else might mention the weather. The original files naming your certification number were created 11 minutes after your shift ended on the 17th of March. You were on record as clocked out at 6:43. The files were created at 6:54. 11 minutes and some distance, even at a run. He looked at her. The College of Occupational Therapists of British Columbia will have it by tomorrow morning. The silence in the room was the specific kind that follows something large. Why? Zola asked. Bruno looked at her for a long moment. Because Rory trusts you, he said, and Rory trusts no one. 3 months passed. The conservatory was transformed. Parallel bars had been installed along one wall, not for mobility but for proprioceptive grounding, a technique Zola had used for years to help children with trauma responses reconnect with their own bodies. There was a sand tray, a small collection of instruments for sound therapy, and a laminated communication board that Rory had decorated himself with small, precise drawings. Rory Driscoll was not a different child. He was the same child now slowly becoming visible. Use the card if you want to, Zola said one Tuesday afternoon. They were sitting on the floor of the conservatory, the inlet silver and wide below them. Or don't. Either way. Rory looked at the board. He looked at her. His lips pressed together with effort, not resistance, but the particular concentration of someone lifting something heavy for the first time in a long while. "B," he said. His breath hitched. "Breathe first," she said. "Take your time." He breathed. She waited. This was the discipline she had relearned in this house, waiting without pressure, which was harder than it sounded. "Bird," whispered, barely voiced, rough as something long unused, but complete, a whole word, his. Zola kept her face calm even though her heart was absolutely not calm. "Bird, you said it." Bruno was in the doorway. She hadn't heard him arrive. She knew he was there only because Rory's eyes moved past her, and the expression on Rory's face shifted into something she had not seen before. A child looking at his father and not bracing. Bruno crossed the room and sat down on the floor across from his son. Not in a chair, on the floor. He looked at Rory without speaking. Rory held up the sketch pad. The bird on the page now had both wings spread wide open. Bruno reached out and put his hand over Rory's. He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was different from any version of it Zola had heard. "Good boy, really good boy." Zola was on the terrace 2 weeks later, the North Shore Mountains dark against a purple sky, when Bruno brought her a glass of wine she hadn't asked for and sat beside her without an invitation she hadn't given. "The licensing board sent their decision today," he said. "Reinstatement effective the 15th. She wrapped both hands around the glass. "I know, they called this afternoon." "So you could leave." "I could," she looked at the water. "Rory isn't finished yet." "No," Bruno said. "He's not," a pause that had something in it. "Neither are we." She turned to look at him. There was something different in the way he said it. Not the careful professional neutrality of the past months, but something direct and unguarded, which on Bruno Driscoll's face looked almost like exposure. She was about to answer when the night exploded. The sound was at the front gate, not a crash, a detonation. The windows along the north wall rattled in their frames. An alarm she had never heard before began to sound, low and urgent, and every floodlight on the grounds snapped to full brightness. Bruno was moving before she had finished flinching. He caught her arm and pulled her down behind the terrace wall. "The Ashwoods," he said. "Flat, certain. Stay here. Rory is inside. Morrow will have him." She was already moving. The house was chaos and noise. 2 of Bruno's security team ran toward the front of the property. Zola went the other direction, up the stairs, toward the conservatory where Rory slept on late nights. The room was empty. She turned, checked his bedroom. Empty. The weighted blanket on the floor, which meant he had been moved fast, in a hurry. She went back into the hallway and stopped. 2 men she didn't recognize were at the far end. One of them was holding Rory by the arm. Rory was not making a sound. He was absolutely still in the particular way of a child who has learned that stillness is the safest option. A way of being that Zola had spent 3 months carefully, painstakingly teaching him he didn't need anymore. "Let go of him," she said. The man closest to her tilted his head. "The therapist," he said, with the amused contempt of someone who has already decided the conversation is over. "Driscoll's done tonight. You can walk away or you can make this difficult." She looked at Rory. He looked back at her. She thought of the bird on the wire, wings folded, waiting. She thought of the word bird, whispered with more courage than most adults she'd ever known could manage. She said, "I'll come with you. Just let go of his arm. He stays here." "Wrong answer," the man holding Rory said. He took a step toward her. A shadow moved at the end of the corridor, and Bruno Driscoll stepped out of it. He looked the way he had looked in Zola's worst early imaginings of this place, completely, terrifyingly certain of himself. His jacket was torn. There was blood on his shoulder. What happened next was faster than she could follow clearly. She pulled Rory toward her and stepped to the wall. There was shouting and a sound she had only ever heard on television, and then the hallway was very quiet. Bruno came to them. He looked at Rory first. "Are you hurt?" Rory shook his head. Looked at Zola. Something crossed his face that she didn't have a name for yet. "You were supposed to stay on the terrace. You were supposed to not get shot," she said. She did field triage in the kitchen with what Mrs. Hennessy found under the sink and what she raided from Bruno's gym. He didn't make a sound while she worked. He stared at the ceiling and answered questions about his pain level, with the stoic imprecision of a man who has decided pain is largely a matter of perspective. "Morrow opened the east gate from the inside," he said. "The Ashwoods paid him." Zola tied off the last suture and set down the needle. "How long did you know?" "Long enough." He turned his head to look at her, dark eyes exhausted, not long enough to stop it cleanly. She sat down across from him at the island. "You're going to be fine," she said. "I know. Rory is going to be fine. I know that too. What about you?" She thought about it seriously. A year ago, she would have said she was trying to survive. 6 months ago, she would have said she was holding on to some version of who she used to be until she could find her way back to it. She didn't feel like that now. She felt like herself, differently arranged, but fully present. "I'm fine," she said. "I think I've been fine for a while. I just didn't stop long enough to notice." Bruno almost smiled. It looked like something he was still practicing. He reached across the island and covered her hand with his. She didn't move it away. 8 months later, on a mild Saturday in June, the Driscoll estate was open in a way it had never been. The gates stood unlocked, tables spread across the lawn. There were people gathered, therapists, researchers, families from programs the foundation had begun funding in the spring, under a banner stretched between 2 Douglas firs at the edge of the property. The Rory Driscoll Foundation for Child Trauma Recovery. Zola stood at the edge of the terrace in a green dress and watched the inlet glitter below. She heard footsteps and turned. Rory was crossing the lawn at something very close to a run, calling out to a classmate who had just arrived. His voice was clear and bright and entirely, completely his own. No hesitation, no suppression, no held breath before each syllable. He tripped on the garden edging. Zola's hand moved toward the railing. Bruno's hand found her wrist. "Wait," he said quietly. Rory put his palms flat on the grass. He pushed himself up. He looked at the dirt on his knees, apparently decided it was acceptable, and kept running. Bruno lowered her hand but didn't let go of it. "Dr. Whitfield," he said. She glanced at him sideways. "Mr. Driscoll, I've been revising our arrangement." "Have you?" "The original terms were, you treat Rory, you stay until the work is done, you leave when he's ready." He paused. "I'm renegotiating." She turned to face him properly. He was watching her with the expression she had come to know over the past months, the look of a man making a decision he is entirely certain about, different from most of Bruno Driscoll's decisions, only in that this certainty had a warmth underneath it. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small box. Not dramatically, just took it out, the way you'd take out a set of keys. "Stay," he said, not as his therapist. Below on the lawn, Rory had caught up with his classmate. He was laughing. Zola had heard him laugh approximately 11 times since she'd arrived at this house. She had counted every single one, the way you count things that matter and can't get back. She looked at the box. She looked at Bruno. "The hours are terrible," she said. "Yes. You're a difficult person, I've been told. And Rory is going to be an absolutely impossible teenager." Bruno's mouth curved, almost certainly. She took the box from his hand and opened it herself, which was not the traditional order of operations, but she had stopped doing things in the traditional order approximately 8 months ago and had not missed it once. The ring inside caught the June light and fractured it into pieces. "Yes," she said. From the lawn without warning, she said yes, didn't she? Rory, standing 30 feet away, apparently having been watching with the poorly concealed strategy of a child who has inherited his father's talent for surveillance. The gathered guests turned. Someone started clapping. Bruno raised one eyebrow at his son. Zola laughed. The kind that starts in the chest and doesn't have anywhere particular to go, which is always the best kind, because it means the chest is full of something worth laughing about. She put the ring on her own finger. She leaned into Bruno's shoulder. Below them, Rory cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted across the lawn to his classmate, "I told you!" His voice carried clearly over the water, past the inlet, past the mountains, past all the silence that had once seemed permanent. It went exactly as far as a voice should go when it finally finds its way home.